Hello and welcome to the Selling's Creative Podcast, a podcast exploring creativity's role in sales from motivation, process, people, development, and success. I'm your host, Brad Eather, a digital communication sales consultant helping sales teams and leaders develop digital sales strategies that open LinkedIn as a sales development channel. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Scott Dunphy-Brown, a sales enablement expert and the founder of Sales Caliber. Scott has had an extensive career in leadership, working with sales teams, including household names like Woolies. And I can tell you now, if you want to learn about what kind of working environments allow salespeople to be creative in their roles and drive successful business outcomes, this episode's for you. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Brett.
Glad to have you with us. So, for those that are unfamiliar with the role of what sales enablement is, what's your definition of sales enablement?
If you had asked me 15 years ago, it would be simply sales training. So working with sales teams, trying to build their capability and their skill sets. But I think over the next sort of the last 15 years, it's really evolved to being a key link between sales, marketing, and product. So sales enablement is anything to do with the skill and capability of the sales team, the marketing message that marketing drive, and also the product features and benefits. So we tend to be that mediator between the three, making sure that when we go to market or sales teams go to market, that the message is very, very clear and prospects and potential customers understand exactly what that business is trying to do or what the problems are they solve.
Great. And so from your perspective, you're coming into businesses and gearing all this up so that essentially you're creating an environment where salespeople can be successful, right? So
Correct.
what do you think the main challenges are from people internally in sales leadership roles? What are they doing wrong, and what could they be? How could they focus their efforts to maybe create a better working environment and enable sales to do their job?
Yeah, that's probably a big Pandora's box you could open and go through. But if we were to distill it down, I would say it's the ability or what they need to work on and don't quite get right is this ability to work across silos. So I often go in and I'll see marketing wants this. This is what we're sending out to the market. We've just released an infographic or a ebook or a survey or a piece of information that they want the market to know. But then sales haven't been consulted, haven't been talked through, or this is what we're going to market. What do we need to put into that? And same again, sales going out there with their own message, and it's not aligning with what marketing's doing at the time. Product might be releasing a new feature that sales don't know about. So they get a prospect that says, I want it to do this. And sales go, no, it doesn't do that. Where, in 3 weeks' time, they're releasing that feature to do it. So it's this ability, I think, or what businesses don't quite get right is how do they align across marketing, product, and sales to have this one united front when going to market. And it's not hard to do, but often you get a lot of egos and bravado that gets in the way because marketing have one view, sales have another view, product are in the background trying to build everything that marketing and sales tell them that they want, but it may not be the customer saying that's the feature that they want. So it's this ability to communicate and work across those silos, I think, is the biggest challenge for business.
Yeah. So we're going to get back into the sales enablement piece in a little bit, but from something that I believe in is that behind every sale, there's someone who can effectively communicate and guide a buyer through their buying decisions. And the ability for a buyer, for a seller to engage with someone in that environment has room for creativity, which is what we're exploring. So what I'd like to do now is sort of get bit of a better understanding about who you are, where you've come from, and some of the creative processes that you may be involved in. Something that I come across quite often with salespeople is they just reject the idea of that they can be creative. They reject the idea that creativity is a function of their job. However, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on it. So, just briefly, tell me a little bit about where you come from. I believe you grew up in New Zealand. What kind of things were you getting up to as a youngster, creatively?
Oh, look, if you ask anyone from New Zealand, you probably walked around with a footy under your arm of some sort, and playing sports. A very outdoorsy, a lifestyle that, you know, requires you to get out of the house and go find your own fun, create your own stories and your own adventures, was probably where I was found, either kicking a footy, climbing a tree, down at the creek, throwing stones across it, and so forth. So we didn't have that drive to, or we didn't have that ability to sit at home and do nothing. We had to come up with our own fun. We didn't have a lot to play with in a toys perspective. So New Zealand was very good in terms of me, you know, being allowed to be free with what I did and how I did it as a kid. I was 16 when I came to Australia, so I had a good transition across of understanding what, you know, the idiosyncrasies of New Zealand as a child, and then Australia as an adolescent, finishing my schooling and so forth here. So and you know, yeah, I got asked how to say fish and chips, and you know, all of the other seven and all the other words that you get ribbed in. But you know, when I came to Australia, that's when I started to understand how to be an adult and how to get into the working world. So it was a very different experience once I came to Sydney to grow up in, and that's where I started falling into this world of sales.
Yeah, great. So it's my understanding that you've, as a young kid, you were excited and about graphic design. Can you tell me a little bit about what you were doing for fun in that space? You said that you were into comic books and things like that. Elaborate on that and what that meant for you as a young guy.
Absolutely. You know, my early teen years, I got into the world of comic books. It was my release, my way of getting away from any challenges and stresses. And I won't go into depth, but you know, the whole bullying piece and going through school and not enjoying my time in my high school years in New Zealand, and this was an outlet for me. So I went from collecting and reading comic books to actually trying to emulate the art in those comic books. And what that led me down a path of was, and it's funny, I call it my wasted talent, because when I draw with my kids, or you know, the wife says, "Oh, can you quickly draw this?" or we're doing renos around the house, and I'll draw a landscape plan. It comes quite naturally because I spent my teenage years just copying and tracing and drawing and creating characters and comics. So, you know, everyone used to tell me, how you're great at art, you should do something with that as a career. So I went down this path of actually becoming qualified as a graphic designer. Now, in the world I qualified in, there were no computers. I think I had 1 hour a week on one of the first versions of Mac. So I'm showing my age now, but you know, to build graphic design. So it was all hand drawn, hand lettered. You had acetate layers over the top, and you had to build these briefs and these storyboards for graphic design. And I absolutely loved it, but I didn't see it as a career, and consequently, while studying graphic design, you know, that's how I got into the world of sales, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But it is still a joy for me now. And in fact, one of my daughters is crazy into drawing, you know, portraits and characters and figurines and things. So, and as much as I'd hate to admit it, I still collect comics to this day.
Yeah.
35 years later.
When you were saying that you were making characters and stuff, like obviously drawing's a part of that, but can you? you were making comics, right? So I'm presuming there's a bit of storytelling involved in that, and building out a story about these characters, right?
That's right. And not necessary. And yeah, you're right. Stories and building a comic, 3 pages, 4 pages, what's the story that you're telling? But also telling stories through just the frame. So what's the body position of the character? Are they moving fast? How do you emulate, speed or movement within just your drawing, even before you start adding text boxes or speech bubbles and so forth. So yeah, really learning how to tell a story through the picture on the page. What is it conveying?
How do you communicate those ideas that you're with a pen and paper drawing an image to communicate that we're going quickly, that kind of stuff? Like, it's really cool. So, I mean, going back to your sales career now, I'm presuming you're in Australia when you get your first job, and
Correct.
You landed in retail. You've gone through hospitality and you've landed in retail environment. Did you get any sort of, from that initial experience in retail, did you get any formal sales training?
There was, as you go through. So I initially started with sort of small mum and dad sort of little places, helping them out. And it wasn't until I got into some of the big box retailers in my sort of early to mid 20s that they had a formalized sales training, but it wasn't in-depth training. It was good training, but it was on pure retail principles of selling. So, when you compare that to B2B selling, it wasn't as extensive and frameworks as that. But how do you approach a customer? How do you acknowledge them? How do you open the conversation? How do you determine needs? How do you objection handle? How do you close the sale? And how do you walk them up with 3 or 4 other items that they didn't think about by the time they got to the counter? So it was very structured and very simplistic in its training. But yeah, that's where I started to understand this world of sales and get the training. I think before that, though, what I learned was through having conversations and those interactions with the customers, even without sales training, just stopping and actually trying to have a conversation with somebody and making it about them started to teach me, how do you effectively sell? How can you create this buying journey for a customer just by having this conversation with them and understanding them?
Learning about, what their day-to-day looks like, what product's going to serve them the best. And then eventually they get to the checkout and they've actually got a product that they want and maybe some more.
That's right. And even to a product, that's at a higher price point because of the quality of the product. They're not just walking in and taking the cheapest product. They've had that conversation going, oh, geez, this pair. And it was with a big box sporting store that I started my career in. So you can imagine a mum and dad coming in and they got little Susie or little Johnny who want to play football or soccer, and helping them get a pair of boots. And it's, getting them to understand, well, what's a good pair of boots that they can use, good quality, but they can grow out of, and it's not an expensive pair of boots. So those conversations was the enjoyable piece.
Yeah. So what I want to discuss is, and I want to frame it around this idea of retail, because I think that when we get into the B2B realm, things become complex, they become complicated. If we stick to retail here, we can paint a really nice picture, because understanding this idea of creativity and sales, you've obviously come and you've had this experience where you're making comics, you're doing storytelling, and now you're in a situation where you're communicating with customers, you're learning about what they're doing in the day-to-day, you're learning how they're living their lives. And I'm talking about in that space of 10 minutes, when you get that time to have a conversation with them, learn what their actual needs are and deliver the outcome. Can you talk to me a little bit about what that storytelling piece is in those 10 minutes, and how effective, or the importance of that ability to generate a story about the information that you learn?
Yeah, I think the storytelling comes from, and your ability to question those customers and understand them a bit more. So the storytelling piece for me is, once I have an understanding of exactly what they want, taking their story or their need and rolling it into a story of, well, what does that look like at the end of your buying journey? Because I think in retail, there was always studies that said the lifetime value of a customer was not in that one purchase they make today. So how do you create this story around the experience they have within store? So by asking those questions, and especially I used to love when parents came in with kids, and here's probably the best example of actually talking to that kid. What do you want to be? Why do you like football, or why do you like rugby league, or why do you like AFL, whatever sport you're playing? And tell me about, what do you want to do? What do you enjoy doing? And it's that emotional side of the story that you get that actually brings them along that buying journey. So if you think about going into retail these days, sometimes you'll get a great experience and sometimes you'll get a poor experience because they go through the script, right? It's just, hi, can I help you? And that, if they stick to the script, then there's less chance of that buyer. However, if you flip that greeting to something that suits you and it conveys your personality and your style, then you get a customer that's more open and warm. So you've got to create that environment. You've got to create that journey for them. You can't just be stock standard in your script. So I think for me, that storytelling comes from understanding them and then being able to weave that into, what does that journey look like? What do you get at the end of it?
Which is interesting, because we're going to move into B2B now, but the experience that you have on a retail floor, and I'm sure many people listening, retail is probably their first sales job, but that experience that you get interacting with the customer face to face is a very different experience to B2B, when you're most likely behind a phone, there's no face. We've now got the pleasure of having the ability to have Zoom, but it's still not the same.
No.
So how would you go about sort of replicating that experience of storytelling, taking someone through that journey, learning about them, and apply it to a B2B setting where it's maybe a little bit more formal, transactional? Yeah.
And I think the principle's the same. What I see and what I try to convey to the sales teams that I work with is, the more you make it about yourself and the story about you and your product and the features and the benefits, the less the customer wants to be a part of that story. The more you make it about them and get to learn them and understand them and listen, and you create the story based on their answers to your questions. And these aren't the standard questions, right? Oh, what are your pain points? You've got to be more creative in the way that you ask, and creative in the way that you hear the answer, which may trigger another little laneway or path, or a little part of the story that you want to venture down a pathway, then bring it back to where you need to be. And I think, retail is the same. Ask the questions, understand the customer, take them down the journey. B2B is the same. The challenge is, you've just got to do it, as you say, on the phone. How do you create that engagement up front so that the customer wants to stop and listen? And if it's you jumping on there and trying to cram a 30-second script into 10 seconds, you're going to get hung up on every time. So how do you stop, pique interest, and ask the questions and weave the story around what they see as their problems at the moment, what are the challenges they're facing, and whether you're an actual fit, right? That's the biggest challenge.
So from what I'm sort of getting is like, that ability to understand the customer's problems and go off script is incredibly powerful in terms of being able to actually create a story and engage with a buyer to deliver an outcome that they can actually envision, and you can take them on that journey, which brings us back to that sales enablement, right? So I'm wondering if you have a particular story about someone that you've worked with that maybe was doing it by the book a little bit too much, and then going in there and facilitating that personality, injecting that personality back into the salesperson, allowing them to go off script. If you had a story about that, and maybe what it took to create that environment.
Yeah, there's probably two key salespeople that I've worked with in the past that were set that way, and they were both from very different ends of the spectrum. So I had one that was very rigid and structured. I had to do half an hour of prep before calling a prospect. I've got to research their website. I've got to do this. This is the script. I don't go off the script. I'm going to talk to this, and getting them to understand that by being on the script was actually creating sales resistance at the other end. One, call aversion, so just get on the phone and call. And the second part was call resistance, because they recognize a sales call each
There's
time.
probably a lot of anxiety in there from the salesperson's perspective as well, right?
Absolutely.
How can an anxious salesperson be effective if they're too worried about the script?
They're not. And the more anxious they got, the more sort of wed to the script, or the I can't veer off track. So the key approach with them was to actually take the script away, but get them to write their version of the script in their language, and slowly wean them off the paragraphs that they would write. So, so the first part, your opening piece, you're calling, excuse me, you're calling to understand we work with these many firms or these types of customers. These are the two common problems we have, out of these, which would be the challenge that you're currently facing at the moment. That whole pattern interrupt type of process. But getting them to go, okay, well, that's the script. How do you say that just in a summary, as opposed to, hi, it's Scott calling from Sales Caliber. I'm hoping you can give me 30 seconds of your time to hear what I want to talk. It's sort of like, how do we pull you off I have to read it word for word, and stick to the script, to going, this is what you want to achieve in the first part, which is your pattern interrupt. Get them to stop and go, permission based, you can have 30 seconds of my time. How to make it better for me. So that's how we work with them.
So essentially what you're saying is breaking down the sales process into bite-sized chunks, so that we know what we want to achieve in the first chunk, we deliver the outcome, we can move on to the next bit.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And it's also changing the vernacular, or changing the terms we use from script to a talk track. So everyone hears script and they go, okay, verbatim. Whereas if you talk about a script being a talk track, okay, these are the themes, these are the things that you want, this is the outcome you want from this part. So as you say, break it down to a smaller piece. This is the theme of that smaller piece. This is the outcome you want. You've now got that ability to adjust that to suit your personality style, your energy, to try and
giving the salesperson that flexibility within that process to be themselves and show their personality.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's take it back. Like, we talked about the individual salesperson in this process, but I'd like to know a little bit about sort of what kind of environment within the business needs to be facilitated. And I think last time we spoke, you mentioned that there was a particular technology company, a fintech company that you were working with, and you had some specific goals that you achieved. If you could tell us a little bit about that story, about where you started, the objectives that you wanted to achieve, and how you broke that down into those chunks to get that organizational cohesion to allow the salespeople to achieve the results that they did.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was actually a legal tech firm working, and the goal was to hit a record sales in what we called a third. So that business broke their year up into 3-4 month blocks rather than quarters. So over one of the thirds, it was to hit a number of sales, and it was 620 was the number. They needed to hit that to break a record. And it was initially thought unachievable that you weren't able to do that. And as we talk through, well, what do we need to do to achieve that? We started to put some fun elements into the journey of hitting that 620. We created jackets with hashtag 620. So as you walked around the office, you had to start every question or every interaction with someone within the office as 620 and shake their hand. So it kept the target alive in every interaction we did through the business. So we had hashtag 620. You had to walk around and say 620 and shake someone's hand before you could ask them a question or have the conversation that you wanted to do. We also created some environments around small wins. So where do we get? How far have we got? We had the normal countdown to get to it, how many days versus how many sales we still needed to do. And kept driving that. We did silly things like the beating your chest like Wolf of Wall Street, which some people liked, some people didn't, but you kind of got that as a bit of a laugh. We took a really humorous view of that rather than a serious one. So it was just, and then we created support networks on. So the SDRs were getting supported by the BDMs. The BDMs were being supported by the SDRs, and everyone was working together to try and make everybody successful, because we knew we couldn't hit the target unless everybody was at the top of their game. So people that were struggling in a week had people rallying around them to try and help them. What can I do to help? What can I help to do? And in the end, we hit 634. So we beat the target by 14. So it was creating that environment of awareness of what was the target, but also a support network of how do I help those around me? If I'm succeeding this week, how do I help somebody else succeed? Because I know next week, if I'm not getting the numbers I need to, somebody else is going to step up and help me get there as well. So I think that environment and thinking about ways you can support and coach and guide and just motivate people in that environment is a better one, because if you create a lot of stress around it and pressure around hitting that number, then people struggle with that. They really start to wilter, and as soon as you get behind the 8 ball, they spiral and they'll never get there. So,
because I think from my experience in businesses, sales meetings in particular can become, what are your targets? What are you doing to achieve them? It just becomes like a monotonous, one-sided discussion. Demands, no give, no support. What are some examples of things that we can do to take the conversation around those kind of targets, achieving the number, and actually have meaningful discussions around things like motivation, things like what are some additional things that we could talk about instead of just what's your number?
Well, in this day and age, reporting gives you those numbers. So if you have to, as a sales leader, if you don't already know those numbers or know what the forecast is for the week, through your reporting, and you're requiring your entire sales team to come in and just tell you where they're at, then you get those types of sales meetings. A couple of the things we've done before with sales meetings is, especially around that motivation, is you allocate somebody or you nominate somebody each week, and next week they have to bring the motivational video. So you play it. It can be no more than 3 minutes long. You put it up front and you play it, and we'd get all sorts of weird and wonderful ways of motivating people, just to give you that sense of, okay, we can do this. What the key things that I used to expect in my sales meetings was, what are your challenges, right? What are the wins? Who's up there? Who's having a challenge? Who needs support? What are those challenges? And getting the collective in the room to create ideas around how they can move forward and get back on track. If you use that time to go, okay, I had 104 calls last week, I had 54 pickups, I had 12 meetings booked, 8 of those were attended. Out of that, I got 2 proposals. I'm missing 1 proposal this week. My goal is, you get a bit monotonous. You need a feedback loop so that everybody can see that with dashboards and so forth. But those meetings should be a time to motivate and support and rally around the team to help everybody be successful and share the knowledge in the room. Because as a sales leader, I thought I knew everything, but I didn't. My team knew everything and they knew the right ways of doing things. So sharing that collective knowledge in those meetings is far more powerful for me than having you read out your numbers, because we can have a one-on-one each week and you can take me through your numbers and what is your plan to achieve those numbers. So you don't need that in it. And I think that comes from this idea of everybody has to step up and front up for accountability. But you create accountability and you drive accountability in other ways, which are far more productive than having everyone stand up the front and say, yeah, I didn't get my target this week. Oh, I didn't get my target last week either. Oh, geez, do I need to think about finding a new job?
Which is the pressure that's on salespeople.
Yeah,
And not necessarily, it's not necessarily always fair, because I think the support and the environment that someone's placed in, you're talking about collaboration, support in that instance. Whereas a lot of salespeople feel very siloed. They're individual targets and they're motivating themselves to achieve them. So I'm wondering, what's maybe some of, like, in those meetings where we're having a collaborative discussion, what's some of the more, anything that springs to mind, what are the most sort of creative examples of a salesperson coming out there to support somebody else and achieve that additional proposal in the book for the month?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to just the outbound approach. I think we had a couple of the SDRs that were trying different phrases and different sayings within their pitch just to create some life in it.
That's one of my favorite ones. Absolutely. Yeah.
And it was great to hear, like, making sure they aren't being derogatory or, really taking it too far. But how do you change things up? So a lot of it was around, hey, I'm trying to get through to this person. I'm not having any success. I keep hitting the gatekeeper. And then you get somebody else out of the blue. Have you sent them a coffee? Or have you sent them an empty donut box that says, I got tired of waiting for you to respond back to me. So I got some donuts for us, but I had to eat them in the meantime before they went off. Here's a voucher to say, how can you have some donuts on me? It's just different ways of doing that. People rallying around to say, hey, let's just go and do some drop-ins. Let's walk in. I'm going to just drop this off, or some little novelty thing that has no relevance to what you're selling, but it sparks that interest. And then when I make that phone call, they go, oh, you're the one who left, that stress ball sitting on my desk, or that fidget spinner, or whatever it is. Yeah, that was me. How'd you go? Did you learn how to use it? So that's some of the examples of the stuff of everyone in those meetings, where present a challenge. What is the challenge? This is what I've tried. Open floor. Who's got some idea? What's worked for you? What have you tried? Or even simply, how about I give it a call? Different voice. Or, I've been trying it and they don't like my male voice. So great. I've got some awesome female salespeople. They're going to try a different approach. And just having a different person call it often gets that success as well. So,
yeah. So there's different stages, I mean, in the sales process, right? And what we're talking about there is that first meeting. How do we get and really all that is how do we get that person's attention to hear us out, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Once we've achieved that, we move on sort of down the sales process. And earlier in the conversation, you mentioned being the mediator between marketing and sales, right?
Yeah.
Those initial conversations, they're great, but they don't necessarily, they're just your pitch to have the opportunity to tell them something more or learn more. As we get into the sales process, we've now had the discussion, and now we're actually learning about them and what we may be able to help them with. I'm wondering, like, what kind of insights are we looking to? What kind of insights can, in terms of getting marketing and sales alignment, what kind of insights could salespeople be looking for to then feed back to marketing to create some cohesion as we continue moving down the sales process? Because I know something about like something that you mentioned was sales enablement is like finding the particular resource that's required for that particular stage in the sales cycle. But every single stage in the sales cycle requires some sort of reiteration, some sort of feedback, some kind of marketing or sales collateral that we can feed into. Sort of, let's take it back to the original question. But what kind of insights are we looking for to align that marketing objective so that salespeople can have those resources?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and as a when you do get involved between sales, between marketing, the first thing before I even get into the resources is having them aligned on the same numbers. And you'll often get this between marketing and sales, the difference of a marketing qualified lead versus the difference of a sales qualified lead, and finding where that meets in the middle, and then both teams being measured on that. Until you get that alignment, it's always going to be, we're going to send out an infographic or a survey or an ebook, and we're going to post that on LinkedIn. We want you to share that, and we're going to get leads for you, and then you're going to go and call them. And when you have that sort of dynamic, then salespeople do get frustrated with, and then they don't share the right information back or those insights that you're talking about. So I think some of the key insights that I really push salespeople to look for in those discovery meetings, when they are, whether it be on Zoom or whether it be face to face, is not only, I'm going to ask this question because I know this is what the answer I want, so that allows me to ask this question, is actually to stop and listen to what's the answer. So you're looking for what are they currently wed to, if it's a platform or a software as a service. You want to understand those problems, but also who are the buyers in the room? And not only, okay, I've got the finance manager, he's going to hold the purse strings, and I've got the procurement manager, and he's going to make me go through the steps of the RFP to answer and make sure we've got all of the right things in it, and he's going to make sure we're not up against another competitor they already have. But who are the personalities in the room?
Yep.
Because those types of personalities receive information or are motivated to buy for very different reasons. So it's stopping and actually taking in the entire environment and potentially talking less than what they think they need to. And sitting and watching. So, okay, a finance manager, and things we used to do when working in the legal tech, right? You'd drop into a lawyer's office and you'd be looking for family photos, or he's got a signed jersey of AC Milan on the wall, or he's got the yachting magazine or the golfing magazine or the Better Homes and Garden magazine in the waiting room, and their receptionist, what are some of the things that are on their desk and stuff, because then you create this ability to connect with them on a personal level. So that's the sort of insights that I expect sales teams or salespeople to look for. And understanding, okay, what are those cool things? Like for you, bookcase on the back, I should be looking and seeing what sort of books you've got on your bookcase there if I can see them. So then I can start to talk about those shared likes or shared hobbies or whatever it may be. So how do you take that sort of information in a discovery session, and then how do you feed that back to marketing to determine what's the best format or medium to send back out to that person that gets them excited about your product? Right.
It's funny that you mentioned the bookcase, because I'm always looking at the bookcase. And I've made a conscious decision to put a particular record up there because we were talking about it. But I will now know who's listened to the podcast all the way through, because I'm planning on putting a different record up every time.
Okay.
To have that, to have exactly that, to have something to talk about that's external to the conversation, so that people can get to learn a little bit about me and my music taste, right? Like, it's simple.
Absolutely.
So something that you mentioned when we were having our prep interview is, when it comes to sales and marketing, you said sales tend to understand the customer from a personal level, whereas marketing sort of understands them from an avatar level. And I think that leads really well into the conversation that we were just having, because if I was going to rephrase that, I would say that marketing have a persona, and they have a black and white persona. It's a picture of XYZ demographics. They're all the same. Whereas the job of a salesperson is to go in and fill that black and white image with color, and provide that experience. What do you think is, like, when it comes to, essentially, that's good account management, right? Essentially, that's what it is. It's essentially good account management. So I just wanted to bring that up because I found that insight really powerful when we were talking before. I'm not sure if you have anything else to add to that, but I think that provides a really nice framework for a salesperson to take the information from marketing and apply it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also too, like, marketing providing that black and white, essentially a coloring page, right? It's when you go to the restaurants with your kids and the waitress brings over a blank piece of paper with a black outline of a drawing and gives them a box of crayons, and then they interpret the colors from it. And it's the same. I think marketing need to provide, this is the baseline of our ICP or our ideal customer profile. What I need you to do is I need you to fill that in so that we've got more rich data that will then help us go to market from a marketing perspective. And that's what I was talking about, that MQLs, or marketing qualified leads versus sales qualified leads. Right? A sales qualified lead is, do they have a propensity or a need to buy from us? Whereas sometimes those marketing qualified leads are, they downloaded an ebook or a white paper. But they were downloading it for somebody else they wanted to give to, or wanted them to read, or they just found it of interest, but they had no need to buy or no propensity to buy. Plenty of times have I run marketing qualified leads that are looking for the jobs and careers page on your website because they want to work for you, not actually buy from you. So I think sales have a great opportunity to help marketing understand those avatars a lot better and turn them into personalities. And once you have that personality, then you have a range of ways of going to market. So if somebody who you find is very visual and outgoing and social, well, you send them a video message. You don't send them a long-winded dot point document because they're not going to read it. But that person that likes the detail and wants to see the brochures, well, then you build a big pack with all of the specs and background of your product, and you send that to them. So I think it's, how do you tailor your messaging and your outbound based on that personality, not based on the avatar? And marketing set the scene, right? They do all of the research and they set the scene. This is the avatar. But those daily conversations or interactions that sales have with those ICPs helps fill in that picture.
Yeah. Because I think, like, for me personally, when I'm I'm a one-man band and I'm doing the marketing and the sales at the same time. But one of the things that I find, in customer conversations, when something that I've said has hit the nail on the head,
Yeah.
and I get that spark in their eyes where I realize that they've come to a realization that they didn't know before. I mean, for me personally, I'm straight out, I'm making a post. But that's the kind of insights that salespeople need to package up, give to marketing, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden you've opened up a two-way communication channel,
Yeah.
because now the salesperson is filling in that black and white picture.
Yeah.
Marketing's actually getting some input from sales, and all of a sudden we're making some teamwork, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think there's something fundamentally that salespeople need to do. And this is what I see all the time. And this is where I have a go at sales, because I've kind of been saying, okay, marketing, sending stuff out there doesn't really hit the mark, which is not always the case. I've worked with some great marketing teams that get it and understand it, and they have that sales mentality. But I think sales also, when it's all good, and when they're winning and when they're hitting targets, it's all intrinsic, right? It's all internalized. It's all me. I did that. That's my result. I did that. But as soon as they're not hitting target, they externalize the reasons why they're not hitting it. And then that's when it's marketing, right? Marketing didn't do this, marketing didn't do that. But they never stop to go, here's my solution, or this is what I think we could try. Do you mind helping me build this out so that we can try it and A/B test it and see whether it has anything? And I think until salespeople swallow their pride and realize that sometimes they're part of the problem, it's hard for them to have that link with marketing, because it's always going to be us versus them. It's always going to be sales. You can have the black pen. Marketing's always going to hold the crayons, right? It's how do you break that down? And I think sales need to realize that we can be part of the problem sometimes.
Yeah.
And if we're not
I think,
feeding that back, then marketing can't do anything with it.
yeah. I think, like, for me, I go on and on about communication being the key, right? And it's communication to the customer, but also internal communication in that respect, in that
Yeah.
example that you've just suggested. And I think that ties back into the environment piece. Like, a successful sales environment needs to be open, collaborative, so that salesperson can take that moment to say, this is what I actually need to achieve this. And don't blame the world. Like, I feel like sometimes you can get quite defensive because you're the front line. And like we mentioned at the beginning, like, month after month after month, if you're not achieving, you do start to think about what's next, but if you have that environment internally where you are having that feedback and at least working towards a common goal that everybody agrees is the best way to achieve it, that takes the stress off the salesperson, and gets people involved in the business process rather than rather than anything else.
Yeah.
Something that you said, again, was the role of a salesperson at the strategic table. Let's have a chat about that, because I thought that was really interesting. What from if you're not a sales leader, you're just a general salesperson within a business. In a successful sales environment, what should a salesperson's role be at the strategic table?
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. And I've worked in some businesses that do it well, and I've worked in some businesses that don't. And I think what the key message to individual salespeople is understanding what is the strategy of the business and what cascades down to you. So what are the moving parts that you have a strong ability to influence or deliver? And you go and I hear a lot of salespeople complain, oh, they've just thrown another 20% increase on our targets. because they've upped the budget. Well, they don't understand why that is. They don't understand what's coming downstream from a marketing or a product perspective. So for a salesperson to understand that first and how it cascades down to them and understand that message, but then also feeding back up and providing input into that strategy. And that can be through their sales leader, because ultimately your sales leader or your sales director is the one that champions that strategy talk at the top. But often you'll find those sales leaders are the ones trying to come up with it by themselves. So you've got to rally around your sales leader and provide information. And again, it's not complaining. It's not telling them what's broken or what needs to be fixed. It's genuinely having some thought process to it and creating some ideas and solutions that may not be perfect, but helps your sales leader formulate better strategy or helps champion that in those greater strategy meetings. And until they start doing that and providing solution-based ideas rather than throwing mud, then they won't have a seat at that strategy table. And it'll always be down to the sales leader to communicate the message down from what they've been told from an exec level. And the execs, if you've got a supportive exec team that want to hear those ideas, then that's even easier. That's part of the way of opening that up. Now, that doesn't mean grab them in the lunchroom and download every idea that you've got. What's that feedback loop? How do you feed that up? How do you present a business plan? Simple 2-page business plan. Well, this is my outline of, this is how I'm seeing the market. This is the information I'm getting. These are some of my marketing ideas. These are some of my, changes to the way that we go to market, changes to pipeline. This is what I expect it to deliver. Then they'll start to get a better say on what happens for a salesperson.
Something as simple as a transparent business plan. How powerful is that when everybody understands what we're trying to achieve?
Yeah.
So to sort of sum up, I think in terms of what we've talked about, creating an environment, creating a creative environment for salespeople. We're sales enablement. We're going in. We're breaking down the sales process into bite-sized chunks. We're aligning sales and marketing and providing resources for each stage so that the salesperson has room and flexibility to make the right decision within their determination at any given point in time, and setting up constructive communication channels for feedback so that everybody's aligned. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, and I'd probably put one little proviso on there, that everyone's solution focused.
Yeah, nice. So to sum it all up, in consideration of that summary that I just provided, what is your definition of creativity?
I think, and I had a good think about this one. I think it's that ability to sort of formulate your own ideas and thoughts around a problem and providing alternative solutions that are going to drive a result. And it's understanding what part you can play to make that better, and having that flexibility to provide a solution, but also take that feedback to continually define it and refine it and make it a holistic solution. So that's probably where I see it. Right, you have the thought, you have the idea, but you got to provide that as a solution, and having the space to do that. Take what is uniform and process driven and pipeline stage driven, but being able to provide thoughts and ideas within that structure that's going to make that whole production line of delivering sales better.
And salespeople being at the front of that definition of creativity have a lot of power, because applying creativity at that level and finding that solution could potentially have a impact on product development, feeding that back through the chain. So there's quite a lot of room for movement as long as the structures are in place to create that feedback chain within the organization. Frontline, you gotta dish up and take the bad with the good, but you've also got incredible power and flexibility if you do it right.
Well, you create your ability to be successful, is what it is. That creativity comes from I want to do better in my role. I want to be more successful. I can sit here and complain about the product doesn't have this feature or marketing aren't doing this. And guess what? You're going to be in the same boat. You're not going to be successful. So you need to flip that and go, okay, what influence can I have? How do I create success for myself? And how do I provide objective feedback and ideas and thoughts and solutions through to the other teams that can help me get there? But if I fight against them and always externalize it, and it's always marketing's fault, it's always product's fault, and you're in denial that you're not part of the problem, then that creativity becomes harder, and nobody wants to hear your thoughts and ideas because often you've got a sharp instrument in your other hand waiting to strike out and have a go at somebody. So
yeah. Well, thanks, Scott, for joining us on the podcast. The inaugural guest will be coming to you with a few more in the weeks to come. But if anybody wants to get in touch with you to learn more about Sales Calibre and what you do in the sales enablement field, what's the best way to get in touch?
LinkedIn's probably the best way for me. Just follow or connect. Send me a message. You can get me at scott@salescalibre.au, and I'll provide a mobile number and so forth as well. So I'm pretty easy to reach, but best starting point is my LinkedIn profile, which is just Scott Dunphy-Brown. There's not too many Dunphy-Browns on there, so you should find it
Dunphy-Brown. All right. Well, I'll leave all that detail in where it ends up on YouTube and Spotify, and maybe a few others. I'm not sure yet. But thanks for joining us, Scott. And we'll see you next time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.